Vacuum tubes and broadcast equipment were replaced by solid-state devices that helped advance the development of color television. Now, this is an example of the devices used in the cameras. These vacuum tubes, they kept getting smaller, and then they graduated to transistors. And then to computer, whoops, let's go back. To computer chips. And that's what we have today in all electronic devices, these chips. The invention of the transistor and computer chips enabled the development of much smaller cameras. So we put together this camera, which inside it housed an image orthicon. It had an electronic viewfinder, first time, and all the components inside were solid state. That was used for several years. We covered smaller cameras that were using much smaller pickup tubes. Now, during the same period, there was a parallel development of television receivers. The breakthrough for development of television receivers came with the development of the cathode ray tube. The cathode ray tube was invented by Carl Brown in 1897. Now, this was one of the earliest, a schematic diagram of an early electrostatic deflection cathode ray tube without the electrostatic focus, but without deflection and focus coils, which would work around the neck over here. So you see here now is a cathode ray tube with a deflection coil and focus coil. And basically, this stayed the same until the very end of television picture tubes. You know, different sizes. Now here's an early television pickup tubes. There was a continuing development of larger and flatter picture tubes. Now they went from the round to somewhat flatter, and shallower tubes until this was probably one of the latest picture tubes to be developed with a flat screen and very shallow. So you know, if you notice when you bought your sets, the cabinets kept getting shallower and shallower. Many manufacturers started manufacturing television receivers. And this goes back in the 30s. There were a few manufacturers, Dumont, GE, and a few others. And of course, the RCA Model TS630, and I bet at least half of us had television sets like this in the late 40s, early 1950s. When Mara and I got married, we bought a used set like this for $55. And they started getting fancier and fancier. Now, at the same time, color television picture tubes were getting bigger. So they were able to develop these color shadow mask tubes as high as, I think it was either 21 or 25 inches, and that sufficed for a period of time. Digital high-definition television was introduced in 1996. The technical term was ATSC, named after the Advanced Television Systems Committee. Frequency modulation can best be described as a system whereby sound waves modulate the frequency of the subcarrier of the broadcast radio signal rather than modulating the amplitude of the subcarrier. This sketch illustrates the difference between AM modulation and FM modulation. Frequency modulation, the standard for sound transmission, was invented in 1933 by Edwin Armstrong. We tend to take that invention for granted. However, it has stood the test of time. The basic principle of FM transmission has not changed through the years. Now, now this is interesting. How did the early television get into the home? You remember the rabbit ears. And then the Lazy H's, and any cosmopolitan city had a sea of roof antennas. Now, how do the folks at home get their television programs from the network studios in LA, Chicago, New York, and other major production centers? AT&T installed the first coaxial cable that was capable of transmitting television video between New York and Chicago in 1941. By By 1951, most major cities were interconnected with coaxial cable. And this is a typical cable that ran the length and breadth of the country. And so network television was born. At first, only major cities were interconnected by cables. New York, Chicago, Washington, LA. In time, network television reached large parts of the country via intercity cable and microwave. Now, throughout the country, you saw these towers, microwave dishes, pick up here and send them out there. And that improved somewhat. However, with the development of stationary geosynchronous satellites, there is now television distribution throughout the world. You'll see at many of the local television stations and cable operations, these huge satellite uplink antenna. And I don't know how many geostationary satellites there are floating around the Earth. I really should check that out. Probably, I would say 50 or more. And then along came cable television to the home. And you might ask, how did cable television start? Well, people want to make a buck. In 1947, John Walson started selling television sets in Mahoney, Pennsylvania. The problem was nobody could receive any TV programs from the nearby TV stations in Philadelphia. The town was surrounded by mountains and could not receive any TV signals. John installed an antenna on top of a nearby mountain and ran a cable to his store and warehouse in town. At the request of local residents, he started to run cables from his warehouse to their homes. Thus, in 1948, the first community cable system was established. Now, many of you remember this control box with a cable to the tuner. Today, there are 59 cable systems in the U.S. The 5 largest are Comcast with 24 million subscribers, Time Warner with 13.3 million subscribers, Cox Communications, 6 million subscribers, Charter Communications with 5.7 million subscribers, and Cablevision with 3.3 million subscribers. Now, there are, I would say, throughout this country, hundreds of smaller community cable systems, but these are the primary ones. Several satellite distribution companies are now competing with cable companies in providing television programs to homes and communities. As of today, there are 3 major TV satellite providers: DirecTV, Dish Network, and Sky Angel. I never heard of Sky Angel until it was Googled. Landline telephone companies are starting to offer cable quality television over their telephone twisted pair wires that you get your telephone into the homes. The first entry into this field is AT&T Uverse. They prepared Palm Miles West for cable television, but they made a big mistake in not preparing Palm Miles for the same thing. So they lost out in the battle with Comcast for a new contract. Now, during this period, there were other interesting developments in television. Kinescope recorder. Now, this is a picture of a typical kinescope recorder, and I'll come back to that. The kinescope recorder was developed in the 1940s to provide a means to preserve the images of live television. The television image was displayed on a kinescope and recorded on a 16 to 35 millimeter camera. This is what Mike and I was telling me about 60,000 volts on the picture tube. You probably have seen some of these old kiddie recordings, but that was the best they could do in those days. Now, the film was then developed and played via a projector and projected onto an image iconoscope camera. Now, this camera up here, that was probably housed the image iconoscope that I have here, and that was in use for many years. A new era in television came with the development of the videotape recorder. The first broadcast videotape recorder in 1956 was the Ampex VR1000. Now, included in the inventors are this young fella here, right in the middle, the one with the suit jacket. His name is Ray Dolby. We all know of Dolby Sound. He left Ampex and built a huge company for himself with some new techniques in sound transmission. In the following years, there were many improvements in professional videotape recorders. After the VR1000, Ampex had the VR2000. That was a 2-inch tape. Then the VPR3 was a 1-inch tape. RCA stayed in the field with 2-inch tapes for a while, but they dropped out of the race. The size of the videotape went from 2 inches to 1 inch and then to 1/2 inch, with the quality of the picture increasing with each change. Now there's an Ampex VPR3, and Sony came onto the field with 1/2 inch high definition cassettes, and that ruled the waves for quite a while in commercial broadcasting. Home videotape recorders were developed and consumers bought them by the millions. There's a 3/4 inch cassette player. I'm sure many of you had the Sony Beta 1/2 inch player, and we all and still have the VHS 1/2 inch player. These, of course, are being phased out completely by DVD, which I didn't bother going into now. How many of you had problems programming your videotape recorder? Virtually everybody. So I figured I would pop this in. When I saw it, I had a chuckle. This was very true. Okay, now we go into color television. In the early 1950s, two competing color systems emerged. CBS proposed a system in which transmitted an image of the 3 primary colors sequentially. There had to be a color wheel in front of both the camera and the TV receiver. This system was not compatible with existing black and white television. The other system, proposed by RCA, was adopted by the FCC in 1953. It was all electronic and was compatible with existing black and white systems. The adopted system was called the National Television Standards Committee, after the Standards Committee that approved that system. Because of the problems in color consistency that we had in broadcasting, I recall that Chiquita Bananas were trying to get the banana yellow, and we couldn't reproduce the yellow of a banana. So we did that, never twice the same color. Well, through the years, with development in Germany and other areas, that was corrected. So the color television you see later on and today is pretty darn good. Now, this was a CBS color television with a color wheel in front of it. Imagine having to watch television with that monstrosity. Now, this was a CBS color camera and now there's a wheel, a color wheel in here. Another mechanical device that would never work properly. So RCA really saved the day on this thing with a color compatible system. And we've been using that basic system through these many years. RCA may have disappeared. Now this is a typical 42-inch plasma television. The LCD, or liquid crystal display, television display panel was introduced by the Westinghouse Company in 1972. At the time, the size was limited. That's why the plasma large screen TV became popular before the LCD screen. Much simpler device. The two systems are pretty good. This is a 32-inch LCD TV. Small ones, which you could do with LCD. Now, both display panels, plasma and LCD, provide excellent displays of high-definition television. You can find all sorts of reasons why to buy one or the other. We have both in the house, and they're both satisfactory. Now, one new concept